Hey, how's it going? Um, Kenny posted something and I posted it on my story. I just recently figured out how to do that. Sorry, I drink a lot of sparkling water, so all the belching that I do in these videos it's not my fault. It's Trader Joe's sparkling water's fault. Um, Yeah, he posted something cool. Oh, he's playing Mars. And on the post, I guess, not that I heard it in the post, but he was saying, don't rush, don't rush. You know, he was telling himself not to rush. I hear you. Did it, do it, yeah. But man, I would just say to you and anybody else that's interested, this thing I've been doing for the last couple of days, I have high hopes for. I mean, especially in terms of playing on our own. When we're playing with others, I don't know what it's going to be like to use this because I haven't done it. But I'd like to think maybe it has a place in that too. But at least playing alone, again, just to reiterate, I posted about it a couple of days ago, rather than relying on our internal clock particularly. I mean, I think ultimately we are. Like, I still believe in the value of a metronome to strengthen our sense of where the center of the beat is, our awareness of where the center is, you know, especially if we constantly refer to recordings of ourselves with a click to see the effect of our placement, you know. I mean, it definitely was a huge part of what enabled me to more clearly be able to hear the center of the beat as a location, as a place, not as a feeling, not as a God-given gift, but just a place, and you either know where that place is or not. And it kind of doesn't matter your state of mind. You know, the thing I always think of is like, no matter how drunk you are, you always know where California is, you know. I mean, unless you're really, really drunk. But we're not talking about that. So it's just a place, it's a location, the center of the beat. And metronome practice is part and parcel of how I'm aware of that to whatever degree I am. But still, knowing that, we still sometimes have a tendency to rush. And this thing I'm talking about, which is not relying so much on, on a sense of the click and keeping steady time and all that, but simply listening to our placement as we play for guidance about where to play the next note. Which again, like, relies on our sense of knowing about the center of the beat, right? Because at least, and no, it wouldn't necessarily do that. Let me change that. It would depend on where you want to put it. Like when I do this, when I'm using this idea, it's of listening to myself rather than kind of referring to my internal sense of where it is. It's like this effect. Right? Even when I'm not playing, I'm not keeping the, like when I pause, did you notice at the end where I would pause for a second and then resume? Even in those places, I'm not trying to keep a beat through it. I'm just listening to where is the right moment to play here, based on the fact that I'm trying right now to play a constant thing in terms of the grid. Where does it feel right to come in? That sense of that, I think, is like accumulated years of practicing with metronome, maybe. Although, as I was getting to a second ago, it's not that you'd have to come in where the beat really is in terms of the grid, and that's where it leads into rubato playing, because rubato playing is all about where is the right moment to play the next thing. In that, you're not relying on a grid to tell you where it is. You're just relying on your sensation of rightness, right? That's something more like this, with the same kind of progression. Right? Like in that one, I'm just kind of like, what is it, where does it feel like, what little tempo should I play here? And then where does it feel like that's resolved? And where does the next thing come in? It's all based on sensation of rightness in terms of placement, right? So in that one, I'm not really relying on a steady grid. I'm just, again, relying on the same thing that I was relying on when I was playing steady at the beginning of this. In other words, when's the next thing supposed to happen? That sense has to do with, I think, how aware we are of what rushed is and what dragging is. In other words, we've experimented enough with a metronome to have a sensation about those things, about what one feels like and sounds like and what the other feels like and sounds like. So I think that's necessary. It's necessary to have that sensation I was talking about being able to listen to something you've done and know whether it's rushed or dragging. If you're not at that place yet, if you're not clear about that, then I think the metronome is fantastic. And I think humanome is fantastic as a way to practice listening to the metronome, because that's what has to happen. You have to get that sense of deferring the thing to the external, I believe, in order to really play with it in the way that can be perceived of as accurate. All right? So, Kenny, I'm probably not telling you anything you didn't get before, but I'm just reiterating because I'm thinking about it all the time. It's my main focus. About one of two right now. Got this other thing, secret, that I'm working on. But yeah, I think it's just huge. Really, it's the biggest discovery I've made all week. Let's put it that way. Anyway, just wanted to mention it since Kenny brought it up. And just a few other things. John says, I'm not totally familiar with all your non-WK albums. Neither am I, quite honestly. But does your 4/8-16 bar formula approach? Okay, the 4/8-16 bar is one thing, the formula approach is another. So let's say 4/8-16 bar thing, phrasing, approach to music, translate to other combos. Only if they play open like I do, and most people don't. Like most of the stuff that I've done as a sideman, there's always defined solo forms, defined chord changes, defined length. Like once that happens, then again, it's the same thing we're talking about with the time. I defer to the form, right? I defer all that sensibility to the form of my 4/8-16. Maybe the form isn't 4/8-16, so that rules at that point. Do I bring some of the aesthetic of 4/8-16 into it? Absolutely, because 4/8-16 isn't just a phrase length, it's a whole way of thinking about what phrasing is and organizing your ideas to have them make sense formally in terms of form, no matter what the form is. So yeah, I bring that to it, but I don't pay it, at that point the 4/8-16 thing is deferred to whatever the existing form is and whatever band it is. Very few people write open stuff. Sometimes they do. I mean, that I see. Sometimes they do. And when they do, yeah, I use that if the rhythm section is using it. right? It's all about that at that point. Are the drums and bass capable and or willing to do that? If they are, great. If not, then I just kind of wing it, try to make the best of it. It's hard, but I do my best. In terms of formula, you know, as I've said endlessly, formula is basically a practice tool. That's how I think of it. Not so much a playing tool. I mean, there are exceptions. I mentioned the solo that somebody brought up on the Donald Fagen record, the Great Pagoda of Fun solo, where I kind of used formula thinking to navigate those changes, because there were a lot of them and I didn't know them by ear. So that's what I use, instead of kind of just typical jazz scale approach, which is how most people would approach something like that, or lick-based approach. But as an improviser, I use formula on that, and I think it worked pretty well. Yeah, so no matter what the situation is, all that stuff applies. Thanks. And then Michael and Matthew just were kind of reiterating that it was great. They found stuff about the video yesterday. He was talking about if there are problems having conversations about it with the cats. Like I know it's kind of unheard of in the jazz and in the blues. You know, blues are just as stuck up as jazz is with that, if not more so. Probably equally. In terms of like, hey, you're supposed to know this, you know. But if you're talking about improvising, not in a stylistic way, but simply improvising, not in an idiomatic way particularly, but simply creating music, then there is no common language, as I've said. So, I mean, there doesn't have to be anything. You can accidentally just wing it and everybody can wing it, and maybe good stuff, great stuff can happen that way. If you're talking about consistency, if you're talking about trying to make it sound as good as it can all the time, then yeah, conversation required and totally cool. And if it doesn't happen, you're just cheating yourselves. Yeah, Michael's just kind of describing like how his process is now, how he records gigs and stuff and listens to them and tries to see what's wrong, and that's all perfect. I mean, that's moving forward right there. Yeah, it's like, yeah, if you're a classical musician and you go to your gig, you're a viola player, and you go to the first rehearsal with the orchestra that's just hired you, and you ask everybody around you, should I be reading notes on this gig? You know, yeah, they will look at you like you're an idiot, and you will be. But I mean, and what we're talking about, there is no such thing as that. Somebody gets lost. Like, I keep getting lost when that happens. What is it and how can we fix it so I don't ruin the band here when I get lost, you know? Whatever, it's cool. It's totally cool. And then Matthew's talking about kind of a similar thing. Right, thinking he should never get lost. When it happened, it was all his fault. Yeah, I know the feeling well. Then he says he kind of got through that. And then this really nice story about Zigaboo. That was cool. It's a cool story. You should read it, people. I mean, I let you describes like hearing the meters play and the guitar player. I don't know if it's the guitar player that's on all the records, but that guy was a metronome. He was the most non-rushing, non-dragging guitar player just about ever. And he's saying that he would get angry when Zigaboo would play fills because the guitar player wanted it to be like a metronome and not like Zigaboo was hearing it. And he would get angry when it happened. It was just great to hear that in like one of the funkiest bands that ever lived, that kind of stuff went on. So that's all. It's like, that is inspiring. It's like, yeah, we're not alone with all this stuff. You know, everybody goes through it. That's kind of how I felt like as a band leader, how I felt reading Miles' autobiography, because a lot of the stuff he talks about in there, the kind of travails of being band leader, like when sidemen get hired away by more successful, monetarily successful people and all that stuff. I'd gone through all that and suffered through it, and so did Miles. And so it made me feel good. Yeah. I'm sharing my angst with the greats here. But anyway, yeah, great stuff. Thank you. See you tomorrow.